And it isn't, pro open borders or not. What it is we have people in our backyards that we don't know who they are or what their intentions are to be here. The lone wolf threat is considerable, but what if it's bigger than that?
The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
Welcome to Borderland Narcosis, an Ironclad original presented by First Form. I got these goodies here, and I love them. Go to firstform.com/Borderland for your products. Our next guest is Steve Hernandez, who is the CEO and co-founder of the North Group, who focuses a lot on safety mitigation as well as security and risk management. So he is someone who lives in the Michigan area and has had a lot of history working with potential terrorist threats and terrorist concerns here in America. And so we invited him on the show. Steve, welcome to the show. Steve is a good friend of mine. We've been friends for a long time. He is the CEO and co-founder of the North Group. It is a security and risk mitigation company. I've worked with him for a very long time, and I felt right now it's very important to have him onto the show so he can explain to us some of the potential threats we have in America that we can look out for. This kind of couples really well with the interview we did about Venezuela and its connection with Iran. And so I really wanted to bring someone in here who knows the conversation, who knows threat assessments in America and what we should look out for as a company, as an audience, excuse me. And Steve, if you don't mind, give a brief bio for the audience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So served in the infantry on the Army side, right down the hill from where you were for several years, right? 2nd Infantry Division, deployed to Iraq 2007, 2008. Was in a reconnaissance company doing high value target interdiction during that time, during the surge, the Anbar awakening, that time frame. So unbeknownst to me, would get to see kind of the rise of what would become ISIS and things like that. And then after that, got into the executive protection space, crisis response, crisis management, became an entrepreneur at some point, and still a deputy sheriff and a reserve police officer, 2 different agencies there. And, just happy to be here.
Can you tell us what the North Group does day in and day out, what you can speak on, and what are some of the areas of expertise that your company does?
Yeah, so when we kind of opened the North Group, the concept was, we did a merger and an acquisition, and we were going to be protective services focused. That has since transcended in the last 5 to 6 years to where we're very intelligence focused, which is where we always wanted to be. So we're a protective intelligence, risk management, protective security firm that specializes in, projects, building security programs, but also identifying risk in existing programs and then kind of embedding folks within different ecosystems from healthcare, private families, corporations to help mitigate risk.
I thought it would be important to bring you on because, like I said, I had a conversation with an individual who's in the intelligence space, and he was pulling a lot of open source information, and he wanted to explain to the American people that this Venezuela situation that's happening, the questions of the current administration bombing some of these drug boats or not drug boats, like all the controversy that's happening. And he was explaining to us that the big concern that America doesn't want to talk about, or the administration won't talk about, is that Venezuela is a hub for Iran. And that took us down a rabbit hole of like, whoa, well, what would Iran want to be so close to us for? Well, we all know the potential threats of that. And so bringing you on board today is almost a moment after that. I would love to help better understand some of the potential threats we might have with extremist groups or nefarious characters or actors that are here in America currently right now. And this also couples really well with the situation that happened in DC. The individual that has ties to a CIA group on top of other things, and then he does an action against American military, killing one of them. And this is something that is now a big concern, right? And then, we can even say now the administration is having issues whether they're going to stop the visas from anyone from Afghanistan or whatnot, or any Middle Eastern country. So a lot here, and I really want to know, what is the threat we have here in America? Where do you want
So
to start with it?
yeah, so let me touch on the Venezuela thing briefly here. So the narco trafficking thing, which you're very informed in. I've actually learned a lot from you over the years on it, from your time with CBP and stuff. Here's what I want to say about that. The enemy, IRGC particularly, Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Quds Force, their intelligence apparatuses, they are going to move to the places where they can operate and hide and facilitate. I think Sarah Adams, Sean Ryan, they've done a really good job at capturing, the estimated, fighters that are in the United States. The predictions that there was man pads that were delivered here over the border, all that we've heard, all the I don't want to even call them conspiracies, right? We'll call them rumor at this point. But what I will say is if you have entities, organizations, transnational criminal enterprise that's operating through Mexico, from Venezuela, through South America, that's a hub to move. What would scare me about what our brother from the intelligence community here is saying is the fact that those organizations understand mass transit of illegal substances and how to bring those substances in the US. Who cares if they're in Venezuela? I care that they're working with organizations that know how to smuggle. So that's another side of this, but what I will say is if they are operating down there, which I have no reason to believe that they wouldn't be, I've heard some of the same rumors as well, but what concerns me about that is what's coming in those shipments and those loads. Um, right now the administration is targeting 0.03% of the narco problem, right? We all know what needs to happen. We need to cut the snake off. We need to cut the head off the snake, right? We need to go after the distribution leadership, the supply chains as a whole, not just a boat or two, but we need to really hit, the leadership. And that's where you start to unpack this. When you do, the site exploitation on the hard drives and get those computers, get those phones, start reverse imaging, engineering. Who are they talking to? What's the data broker chain look like? How are they moving money? We know that there is a commingling of both domestic and international terrorism and domestic and international drug, cartels or organizations at this point. We know that. We know that that's happening. Um, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I don't know, right? Like this is it's complex. But to kind of shift on you here, where I think the greatest threat lies is in three areas. One, I will stand by what I've said to you many times, Rocco, which is disinformation is the greatest threat to humanity, right? And I do believe that, you know, whether it's ISIS, Al Qaeda, IRGC, the GRU, the North Koreans, even the Chinese, everybody has their hand in disinformation to destabilize the West. That is the greatest threat to humanity. Underneath that, let's just use an iceberg concept here. You then fall into the realm of lone wolf actor inspired attacks. I think that's the next greatest threat, right? I'm up here in Michigan. We had that attack on the Mormon church up here. Pretty horrific attack. Um Fortunately I was on an airplane when it happened, but the sergeant to my reserve agency was like, "Hey, are you available to go?" Everybody's going. And what even though that individual, it hasn't come out that he was, Islamic extremist inspired or anything like that, you have this disinformation factor where mental health, and we've talked a lot about mental health, and I know this is a big passion of yours, but mental health is driving those attack vectors. Well, now add the Islamic extremist piece to this, where you have a society that feels that they don't have a home, they don't have a belief system, things are falling apart. It is very easy if I am in a gaming chat room talking to impressionable 16, 17-year olds, wanting to give them action and cause to say, "Hey, have you ever thought about the Quran? Have you ever thought about is?" And listen, I live up here in Michigan. I'm Lebanese by birth, right? I completely respect this religion. What I don't respect is the ideology of radicalization being inspired through it on all sides, whether it's left, right, Christian, Islamic. My issue that I see is there is radicalization through disinformation, And then there is radicalization through target identification, meaning I'm on a gaming platform. I'm an impressionable 16, 17-year old, 14-year old, and my pattern of life is detectable, right? My attribution, who I am, what I believe. I'm kind of lost, maybe no mother in the home, no father in the home. I'm talking on this platform to somebody that I can't identify. I don't know who they are. They could be in here, they could be in India, they could be in the Middle East, whatever. And then comes the ask, right? And once that ask happens, that handler, that facilitator knows, and this is very common, knows that they have a hook into an individual or they move on. Right? So I think the disinformation inspired lone wolf attack is of major concern. I also think that there are, based on intelligence, there are a number of people already here. We've called them sleeper cells over the years. We know that, during the Cold War, Russian intelligence had this model built, right? To be able to get folks into the United States, leave them here, plant them, give them a domain to live in, operate in, work in, and if the Russian government ever needed them, they'd call on them. We know that that's not just fiction in movies and books. We know that's real. There's been a lot of leaked information about that. If you look at the New Orleans attack in January 1 of this year, pretty significant, right? The individual rammed with a truck. He had multiple IEDs within his vehicle. The question is, did the individual conduct pre-reconnaissance and plan that out? As we are seeing, most of those instances from, you know, even the plot that happened around Halloween here in Michigan, where the FBI conducted multiple raids, um, kind of sent communities into a tailspin because we were going to have hundreds of thousands of little kids out that evening trick or treating. Um, I think it was a little preemptive on, saying that we got this before, they could release information because it created multiple disinformation scenarios, which I do think adversaries hop on. The one thing that ISIS, Al Qaeda, these organizations want is fear. They want to put the West in a state of constant fear. And that's ideological, goes back to when we invaded their countries in their mind, right? Through Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, the different things that we've done abroad, they want to put the West in fear. You can't necessarily combat that because you're just doing a counter IO campaign, right? Hey, this is what we know, this is what we got. There's no threat. But for organizations, law enforcement, otherwise, to come out and say that there is no threat to the public on that Halloween date was kind of like, well, that's not necessarily true. There is a threat to the public. You're detaining individuals that were planning a ISIS inspired attack. Immediately within hours, our protective intel team called it, right? Before anything came out, that this is what this was. And they were doing some stuff on the back end because we had clients that wanted to know what was going on. On top of that, you know, I do believe that you talked about, the individual that came from Afghanistan. Listen, we would not have been able to fight those two conflicts the way we did without the great interpreters, informants, assets that were developed by the intelligence community abroad. That being said, we couldn't just leave them all there, right? We had a bunch of open data exploitation that had occurred during Afghanistan, kind of falling, where if these folks were identified, it was going to be bloodshed at an unprecedented level in the which still happened after we left Afghanistan. There were still thousands of people that were taken by the Taliban because that data leak existed. What does that mean for us? Right now, it means that the former administration did what they thought was right. A lot of us agreed with some of that, but the vetting was complete shit. We know that. That And how I know that is because our firm at the time, if you remember, we were working on that SIV vetting plan. We wanted to build a comprehensive HUMIT, SIGINT, and we were using a company that does voice pattern recognition analysis, 98% accurate to the polygraph, right? Um, they have a 2% fail rate, and that's just on certain things. Someone has a cold, their voice pattern is irregular, from their baseline. You can't pick up the anomalies, but things like that we wanted to do. There were other companies out there trying to come up with vetting solutions for the influx of those SIV applicants, those special visa applicants that were going to come from Afghanistan. This is not just an Afghanistan issue. Everyone's focused on that on the news right now. This is a Syria issue. This is an India issue. This is a Southeast Asia issue. This is a open border issue. And it isn't, pro open borders or not. What it is we have people in our backyards that we don't know who they are or what their intentions are to be here. And if when you assimilate to the United States, and you go through that whole process, you pledge an allegiance to the Constitution, right? And there's a number of people, and it's something I heard this on a talk show recently. Somebody was saying, "Well, if somebody violates that, what are we doing about it?"
Yeah.
Right? So I think the threat is much larger and concerning, and I can get into kind of some of the fears that I have on what it'll look like if it happens, but it won't be the lone wolf threat is considerable, but what if it's bigger than that? What if it's multi-state, multi-jurisdictional, hinders our response capabilities, things like that. And I got to look at October 7th. For me, October 7th is a TTP analysis. We need to analyze those techniques, and procedures that were used in Israel on October 7th.
Hey guys, I want to give a shout out to a company I've trusted for over 11 years, First Form. They make high quality supplements, protein powders, vitamins, performance products, everything you need to support your health, fitness, and recovery. Look, my weight goes up and down like a lot of us, but when I'm dialed in and focused on my health, these are the products I trust. Their Formula One protein powder is my go-to after every workout. Cinnamon Toast Crunch, hands down, is my favorite flavor. I use it after every workout and it tastes amazing. They have other flavors too, like salted caramel, red velvet, and chocolate mint cookie. Not a protein shake person? No problem. Their protein bars taste like candy bars, and my favorite flavor is cookie dough. All the First Form products are made here in the US. No junk, no sketchy ingredients, no BS. Orders over $75 is shipped for free, and if you don't love it, they'll actually give you 110% of your money back. Go check out firstform.com/borderland now. Yeah. From what it sounds like is the individual, the lone wolf actors. We've had that for many years. We've seen it from time and time again, just one here, one there, all over the place, like we just saw in DC. And you're not as concerned of those as you are something that could be greater, is what you're saying, correct?
I think that I don't want to say not as concerned. There's different parallels, right? So if I analyze the October 7th style attack, that attack tells us that they hit telecommunications, perimeter defense systems, law enforcement response, 911, they're equivalent to our Nina 911 system, right? There were multiple thought processes there. That was not a couple guys got together, at a mosque and said, "Hey, we're going to do this." That was a nation state sponsored, facilitated attack, right? There were there were there was money, resources, logistics, and that's what I think we need to look at this like. So there are not just if we have the multi-scale attack here, it's not just the attackers that we have to hone in from a law enforcement standpoint and find. We have to find the facilitators, the logistics, the planners, the surveillance apparatus, because they're learning from intelligence communities, foreign adversarial intelligence communities, how to set up networks, how to set up those different attributed, cells, if you will, right? That are blended in and And I'm telling you, like, if you really think about this, online radicalization, yes, it's a problem, but what if those lone wolves are convinced to fall in tow and toe the line with the hardliners, the fighters, the ones, the 1,800 in theory, the prediction that there's 1,800 hardline IRGC fighters here in the United States. That's what's been put out. Multiple sources, intelligence has discussed it. There's been some releases on it. Um, why hasn't it happened? Right? That's the
Y-
question I continue to ask myself. When is it going to come? I do believe it will come. I do believe that we are constantly in a state of almost hyper paranoia as a nation that it will come. I mean, look how far we are from 9/11. Look at the distance between the first Trade Center bombing in the garage to September 2001.
Yeah.
Right? So that's kinda, that's my obsession is the data. What's the data tell us? Right? Time, distance, and direction. What's the data saying? Is there probability of a greater attack? Look at the planning cycle that went into 9/11 versus the first World Trade Center attack, which was kinda like, it was a big deal, but it wasn't. And then you have, the disenfranchised, political system. You have all the pro-Palestinian, you know, um, differentiators with people not agreeing on that. So you're almost mass radicalizing an entire half of our country through political differentiation, right? And it's constantly happening. And a lot of it is disinformation, right? Because when you look
That's all
at
I was gonna. Yeah.
it
Go
all
ahead.
ties back to it, right? I'll say it like this. There's a guy named Chase Hughes, right? I think he was on Sean's podcast recently. Great. I I've been watching everything the guy says. And he said something about information operations. He said if you're in an environment where you are being told something that does not have a factual context to it, you are in an information operation campaign. And I was like, whoa, that's huge. And he said that there's no amount of those that can exist, right? There's no set number. Like, oh, you can only have, you know, IRGC could only have 10, IO campaigns. This is as many, people you have online that can filter data and create content and content, right? So
Yep.
if you have 200 marketers in a basement somewhere and you have another 100 cyber people that can write code, you can create a nation moving disinformation campaign in multiple vectors. And I have to look at it like this. We have domains of warfare where we come from, right? So, cyber, the web is a domain of warfare. We have gotten away from human engagement on disagreement, and I think it's very strategic, right? But it is creating the online radicalization problem and then evolving into, well, if I can radicalize 10 people, I can continue the fear-based shock and awe campaign, but at some point, history will tell us there needs to be a large scale event.
Let me ask about the large scale event potentials. So, I seen some of the talks about these sleeper cells, right? We have conversation about that right now. Um, Stuff like the DC attack kind of raises that conversation again. Things that are happening in Venezuela raises that question right now. If we have a mass attack, what are some of the big my biggest question right here, just on the military mindset, like how do you coordinate that? How are they going to coordinate that in a way to be successful? What are
So
some of the
I
areas they potentially attack to be successful? What does
yes.
that look like?
So I think pre 9/11, Al Qaeda working with, you name it, MBH, right? Different organizations through political action committees. Now members of our Congress and Senate, right? I think that if you look at the Muslim Brotherhood, if you look at CARE, if you look at these organizations, history will tell us that the Chinese government uses super PACs to inspire US election efforts, right? Some other foreign organizations use espionage. I think that the terror organizations we are concerned about have watched how both our political system is our own demise at times, and then the ability for information to be shared so quickly is also. So what they do is they create a silo, right? So let's say Dallas, Texas is a target, right? Well, they know they need logistics, planning, surveillance, equipment, and then, threat actors. So the way I have heard it, seen it, and been taught about it is those threat actors will most likely not know each other. And there will be, principal handlers for each operational segment of an attack. And I think this is where you'll see the Al Qaeda, um, even IRGC involvement is in that large scale, right? And you're talking the same way we would conduct a raid on a cartel stronghold in a city, right? We deploy assets, simultaneously hit it, right? Because we know they have their signaling, their coding, their communication system set up. So I think you're going to see hidden communication platform use, right? So could be Signal, could be Proton Mail. I think they're going to use pre-reconnaissance and pre-surveillance, and that'll start anywhere from 6 weeks to 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 50 weeks out, right? They're gonna be looking for mass casualty. I think the one saving grace that we have with that is the number of us that are out there kind of, I don't wanna say hoping, but prepared for that.
Yeah.
What will happen is if it's in multiple states, which I believe it could be, it'll be shock and awe, and then it'll be that primary major attack with secondary, tertiary, options for them to execute depending on capability. I don't think that an attack that size would need more than 100 threat actors, and 25 facilitators, and maybe another 30 logistics support, you know, folks. So take that 250 people, right? Could execute a destabilizing attack behind US soil very easily. And it's a lot like this, right? They're doing their PDSS. They're doing their pre-deployment site survey, right? They're figuring out logistics, routes, movements. Um, and in my military mind, right, that's what I'm looking at. Like the guy with the trench coat is concerning, but the guy watching the guy with the trench coat is a hell of a lot more concerning to me. Well, we can deal very easily with the guy in the trench coat, should he decide that he's operational now. But the facilitator, and it goes back to the Venezuela drug cartel problem, right? The facilitator, the leadership, the management are the critical issue that we need to understand. And I only have to hope that the FBI, even the agency, and the law enforcement apparatuses around the country and around the world are considering this. But for the first time in history, I think that attack planning will come around holidays, large gatherings, parades. Um, we have seen multiple incidences where primary, secondary, and tertiary attack methodology is used. So, vehicle ram, exit the vehicle, engage innocent targets, right? They go to run, detonate pre placed IEDs. That was the exact setup of New Orleans. So,
And did he just not get around to setting those off?
there was some sort of malfunction with the detonation of those devices, is what I heard.
And how about with the DC attacker? He just only had a pistol on him, correct?
Yeah, and here's the thing with that. I think that to me is lone wolf inspired, right? But I also, and I want to caveat this to our law enforcement, partners and folks out there watching. You may be on a traffic stop, right? Completely innocent, have one individual in a car, got no PC to search it. But what if that individual is on his way to facilitate that? And this is where I go down the road of like behavioral threat analysis is critical for everybody involved in this conversation. Understanding the because Rocco, I don't believe that these people that could be here to at least facilitate, recruit, um, support logistics, I don't believe that they're sitting on their couch. I believe they're working jobs. I believe they're living their life um, underneath the guise of waiting to be told when to move, when to activate, things like that. I believe that's a very real threat. It's no different than us building source operations around the world, right?
Yeah.
We create sources in countries to provide us information and act on our behalf all the time.
I want to thank our partners over at Ammo Squared. They've built what they call America's Ammunition Reserve, basically an ammo savings account. You sign up, pick from more than 70 calibers, set your auto buy budget, and either choose a shipping schedule or just let your reserve grow. Over time, your ammo stacks up and is stored for free in a climate-controlled facility in Texas or Idaho until you're ready to ship. No minimums, no extra fees. It works whether you got a small budget or just don't want to drop a few grand at once. Thank you so much, Ammo Square, for providing such a cool service and supporting the show. Is there a prominent disinformation campaign that you have identified or you've been able to identify that we can help the audience kind of further understand what that looks like?
Yeah, I'm gonna come back to that. The other thing I want to say real quick before I forget this is maybe some of these incidences, Rocco, are to see our response times, to understand our
TTPs, how do we manage it?
yeah, how what's our tactics, these procedures look like? What are we doing in response to this attack?
It's
Okay,
no
so
different what they did in Iraq with daisy chaining IEDs. They started doing just IEDs and then they daisy chained them.
yeah, because they knew how we did our 5s and 25s and we stepped off a truck, right?
Yep.
So they knew they were gonna have a mass so analysis is not out of the question here. Counter analysis to our actions is also, it's going to continue. And to answer your question on kind of number one disinformation campaigns, I think I think a lot of this what ICE is doing, agree or disagree on some aspects of it, I think a lot of it is being used to create new narratives and further disingenuous targeting on Western culture, right? I think that's one big one. If I tell you that the sky is blue, right? You're gonna look up, say, "Hey, no, it's not. It's gray." But if I put a blue billboard and I have 5 people walk past you with a blue shirt, you're gonna start to like the color blue. And eventually you're gonna start to see blue more. It's like buying a new car, right? You never really notice that car on the street, and then all of a sudden you're like, wow, I see that car all the time now. I think that this is where disinformation starts to meet psychology, right? Is I don't necessarily we just had that thing up here in Dearborn, Michigan, right? Where a bunch of far right individuals came out and said, we're going to burn Qurans in the street. Now, what concerns me about that is that didn't get shut down in the way that it would that it would have normally, say, with the prior administration. Because if we start burning Qurans, we're creating the case for target retaliation.
Yeah.
It's like if somebody said, hey, I'm going to burn 100 Bibles. Well, no, you're not. I, I don't, I'm going to burn the flag. Well, no, you're not. Hell no, you're not. Right? Like
Yep.
we've had this conversation, right? I don't know. I don't know what I would do in that moment, right? If somebody starts burning the American flag.
Yeah.
But what it creates is a channel for hate and discontent to now foster. Now, what if in the day of AI and the age of mass communication, I just start to gather who feels a way about this. And now that becomes part of my radicalization model is I use those data sets the same way we do with marketing to now market hate and discontent to people that I know don't really like the West, don't agree with the political system, aren't about love and peace. They're mad.
Yeah.
And now I say my cause is your way out. That's the fear factor right there. That's happening at a untracked, unprecedented rate. There isn't enough protective intelligence tools, intelligence analysts, and AI to help us even understand that mass communication happening in real time every day.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you start talking about that, I start thinking about video games and kids. And when you were talking about that, like Roblox and other games that are known to be able to communicate and have already been proven to be used to manipulate to coerce children into other things. It gets pretty scary, but I've always said the same. It's like we have so much information out there, social media, TikTok, all those
Also,
things, so much information that we're not equipped to manage it well.
let me ask you this, Rocco. Do we stop living our lives because we're afraid? No.
No.
That would actually allow the very narrative of Western culture to completely disintegrate. Attack timing preferences are going to be such like major holidays, New Year's, Christmas, 4th of July, things that have symbolic meaning against the ideological radicalization belief system, right?
Yeah.
Could be, major sporting events, right? But see, like Super Bowl is a national security special event. It's an NSSE, right? So, completely preparations 18 months prior, right? It's
Yep.
done very well. But if you look at the Boston Marathon bombing, low tech, radicalized two people, right? If you look at election periods, symbolic anniversaries like 9/11, right? High profile gatherings with media presence. Also, you're starting to see the decline of organizational acceptance to the attack. You know how years prior you would see an immediate release of, um, on behalf of ISIS, we're happy this happened and this was great and we inspired this. That actually is slow rolling on things now, which tells me, if from an analysis perspective, they're watching our response, right?
Yeah.
If the enemy's changing their TTP, there's a reason. There's a reason. And we have to watch that. We have to watch that reasoning. Right now, you have less law enforcement across the nation than ever. This is going to be done in small towns, communities that have heavy impact, um, have that Western culture, small town approach. I don't necessarily think it's going to be big cities. I don't think it's going to be Super Bowls. But if there's 2,000 people at a Christmas parade, right? And you have 4 of those style events, you might hit numbers 9/11.
Yeah.
You might hit those casualty numbers, right? And that's the thing where I think that to do this, they have to stay off the grid. They have to move legally, right? Munitions, weapons, equipment, gear.
Yeah.
Some may even be bought legally. I mean, how many green card holders do we have here, right?
Thousand.
That can
Yeah.
legally go get their CCW. I mean, so again, not to go down the road of paranoia because, this doesn't change how I live or operate day in and day out. It does change what's in the back of my truck, right? It does give me more um ammunition, no pun intended, to be prepared, right? But at the end of the day, this is if October 7th, 2023 tells us anything, it's this. There's a renewed interest in joining ISIS. You had inner country, outer country travel to join that attack, right? Youth radicalization is accelerating at an unprecedented rate. I think attackers are getting younger. We're seeing, more and more of them between the age of 16 to 25. I think that there's a growing number of concerns about individuals who entered under refugee, asylum programs, uh, and DHS has come out and said this recently, the vetting was inadequate. Okay. Well, and they're showing numbers to that. I think there's a ton of AI enhanced propaganda that we cannot compete with, meaning we can't do that counter IO campaign to say this is AI. I mean, it's on platforms that governmental control doesn't exist,
Yeah.
right? Sanctioning is impossible. These are corporations that are not, and they've gotten better. Like Facebook has done I think a great job at starting to censor, but
Yeah.
Snapchat is completely uncensored, right? And you look at the gaming programs, the gaming chat rooms,
Yeah.
encrypted platforms, I think is a whole nother animal that, not that I mean, I love our encrypted platforms and we use several of them. We have clients on a couple that were recently created that we know are good, but I think you're also seeing what I like to call salad bar extremism, right?
Explain that.
I mean, it's mixing ideologies to make profiling difficult. It's using differencing of opinions. Maybe someone who's not is an Islamic extremism, but a far leftist that truly believes the West is dead and Marxism is real and socialism is the only way forward. That person is a prime target for recruitment.
It's a really interesting time. Really interesting time to think that we have so many threats in America. And what is it about America that is such a target? What is it about America that's the big target?
So we're a 270-year-old plus toddler with a rattler called freedom. And when you try to take it from us, we throw the biggest fit you've ever seen, right? And we're the golden child. We're the golden child. And it's because of our democracy. It's because of our constitutional founding fathers and the belief systems that founded this nation is a threat culturally to countries that have been around a lot longer. I mean, listen, China doesn't think in terms of democracy. They don't think in terms of generations. They think in terms of dynasty, right? They're 100 years ahead. So the ideologies of radical extremism, I think are fed through multiple sources, but also are balanced by one defining factor, which is I no longer have to say it's okay that I don't agree with you. I can do something about it.
Ladies and gentlemen, this episode is also brought to you by Aura. Have you ever wondered how scammers get people's info so easily? It's because data brokers are out there collecting everything: old addresses, phone numbers, family connections, even little details most people don't even remember about themselves. And they just sell it. No consent, no safeguards. Anyone with a credit card can buy it. It is insane. And once you actually see what these brokers claim to know, it feels like privacy doesn't exist anymore. That's why a lot of people are turning to Aura. Aura does the heavy lifting, finding the sites selling personal information, getting it removed, and keeping it off. Other services do some of this, but nothing comes close to the amount of protection Aura folds into one plan. You get dark web alerts, real-time fraud alerts for banking and credit, 24/7 identity monitoring, a VPN, antivirus, password manager, even $5 million in identity theft insurance, with US experts ready to help anytime. You can try Aura free for 14 days at aura.com/ironclad. In those 2 weeks, Aura starts scrubbing the personal information off data broker sites, and nobody should have their whole life up for sale. And Aura actually does something about it.
And the height of that started with the dot-com boom, right? Started with the ability to where I'll ask you a question, Rocco. How many times you been in a fight with your wife over a text message,
Oh yeah, we
right?
just yeah, taking it the wrong way.
What do you mean why? Why'd you say why like that?
Sure. When you say
Yeah.
sure, it's like,
What
what do you mean sure?
why are you mad at me? So take that analogy, right? And put that over entirety of humanity, disagreements, differing cultures, different nations, different belief systems. I mean, listen, if you go through, we use some of our AI tools to scour the internet for different mentions of different things. And sometimes it'll just be kind of fun to read a chat forum where they're arguing about nothing because they read a comment 350 comments down. And now all of a sudden they're radicalized to that post when nobody actually disagreed with anybody, but an AI bot comes in and says something that completely persuades the masses. This is the problem. So if if I'm able to recruit assets, targeters, you know, and create an execution strategy for mass casualty to the ideology, it is really important to say this. It is not going to be done ever the same way twice, right? There's different methodologies that will apply, different tactics that will apply, but they're learning. The enemy is constantly learning. Combatants watch I'll say invading force, just as watching an invading force will watch the indigenous, you know, members of a nation. I mean, so at the end of the day, we didn't learn anything from Iraq, right? We didn't learn anything from Afghanistan, right? And I don't mean that from the GWAT generation because I think we learned a lot. I think that the powers that be, the members of Congress, the state gubernatorial leadership, and even domestic law enforcement as a whole is behind the curb with what could happen. And what's the bottom line to that? Right? I mean, if you think about that, it's not going to be necessarily it's not going to be necessarily about how do we fix it? How do we do it? It's going to be initially about how do we respond to it? What's critical incident command going to look like? Right? And then how do we catch these folks? You know, are these suicide? I mean, you remember the report that came out last year about this new plastic explosive,
No.
this not this non-metallic explosive. That there was this report disseminated around the community that you know uh, a terrorist organization had developed a a explosive component that was undetectable by any type of magnetometer, sniffer, anything.
I don't
It could
remember
be,
that.
yep. I'll send it to you. It could be worn as a suicide vest. And
Interesting.
I think Sarah Adams is the one that had put that out. And it was really interesting because when you looked at it, I mean, my first mindset was like, well, man, stadiums, right? Stadiums, large venues, things like that. I think what this will look like without theory, if they really want the impact that we know in their hearts they want, is multi-domain, multi-location, right? Mass casualty, which shuts down the American operating system overnight. Tie schools into it, tie malls into it, tie churches into it, all of those things. If it's school related, across the nation. I mean, you're not going to have kids going to school, which means parents aren't going to go to work.
Yeah.
It's all about destabilization. People think about it like, you know, it's focused on just the ideological part of their belief system. It's much deeper than that. It's about destabilization.
Mm. Well, Steve, I appreciate it, man. I appreciate all the information. The disinformation stuff is nuts. And every theory and every thought you have, I appreciate it, man. Any last words for the audience? Just kind of get their minds in a place where maybe they could be better prepared.
Yeah. I think that, just kind of in closing here, despite kind of like the recent attacks, what I do want to say is longer term data is suggesting this. Jihadist terrorism in the United States is not a resurgent in terms of volume, but individual attacks will be devastating, and those will lead to a greater call for action. Every attack is a symbolic representation to a call to action. So if you think about it like that, that's where preparedness is, right? Um, I will say, see something, say something is huge. I think that these threats require sustained, vigilance without panic, right? It's okay to call your local sheriff's office and say, "Hey, so and so just moved in. Something's not right. There's 25 males and just, they were loading in Pelican cases in and out of their vehicles." I mean, I think it's be aware of your community, be aware of your surroundings, use situational awareness at all times. In the event that a major attack happens, unless you're capable, leave immediately. I think that, you know, firearm-based attacks are concerning, I think, as well as vehicle ramming attacks. I don't think IEDs, bombs are out of the questions. I think that's concerning as well. I think if you see somebody drop a bag with, a pressure cooker in it, call that a clue, right? Um, get as many people out of the hot zone as possible, right? Create distance.
Yeah.
Um, I think, of the 60 plus, plotted, tracked, um, 49, attacks, 49 could be considered homegrown terror plots, right? I think we're seeing that younger attacker age piece, which is huge, 16 to 29 roughly. And then many of these folks are being self-radicalized. So that goes to the point of if you're a parent, a teacher, and you're noticing that trend, this might not be, radicalized terrorism, but let's say, school shooter mitigation, things like that. If you're seeing the change in an individual, whether it's the workplace, the school, be a human. We need to love humanity a little bit more. We need to forgive slights and understand that maybe that wasn't someone's intent, because radicalization always has another common denominator, which is loneliness and segregation. They feel that they are secluded from society, and that creates that planning cycle. That creates that pathway to violence.
Thank you for listening to Borderland, Narcosis, and Ironclad Original presented by First Form. Go check out your First Form supplements at firstform.com/Borderland. See you later, y'all.